Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. Well, Mike Bechthold, historian, map maker, and author, returns to drill down on one of the more controversial and, of course, tragic incidents within Operation Totalize, the fate of the Worthington Force on a piece of high ground near Estre-la-Campagna 80 years ago today. If you haven't seen the Operation Totalize panel from 2 days ago, where Mike, along with Arthur and David, were discussing the broader Operation Totalize, you can go back and watch that later on, but this is when I drill down on that particular one there. So I'll bring Mike in. So this has been a baby of yours for some years, Mike, isn't it? I mean, you were writing about this back in the early days of the battle guide book with Terry Kopp that's been at the Juno Center, but it's you return to it because new information's coming out.
Yeah, and I think it's just such a classic story that's been misunderstood over the years. How did they get lost? Why did they get lost? What's going on? And it's such a terribly tragic story that I think it's one that's worth retelling.
Absolutely. It's got, I was reading your paper on it today, and it's got that elements of like Custer at Big Horn. It's got those, as soon as the word lost comes into something, it has connotations. There's a suggestion of incompetence and when you realize, as I did this afternoon, we'll realize today, there's so many elements to this, a misunderstanding and literally the fog of war that was affecting things 80 years ago. So Mike, you've come armed with massive amounts of slides, folks, and there's a lot of slides, lots of information. Of course, you'll feel free to put in your questions, but I'm fairly certain that most of the questions you will have, Mike will cover as we go along. But this is it. Normandy Alamo, the destruction of Worthington Force 80 years ago today. Over to you, sir.
Wonderful. Thanks, Woody. Hello to everybody out there. Really glad to not see you, but know that you're out there and listening. And I'd love to get your feedback and questions, and we can turn this into a bit of a discussion as we go on. But what I wanted to do starting is to give you sort of an overview of Worthington Force. And we kind of have the advantage that we just did that great panel a couple days ago with David and Arthur on Operation Totalize. So that if you were there, you've got a bit of an idea of the background of this. On Wednesday, I guess I said that Worthington Force was part of Totalize, which it is, but in some ways it's not. It's kind of its own little story that sits on its own and kind of has to be treated on its own, but it certainly had its beginning there. Usually when I do a talk like this, I'll spend a fair bit of time building up the background of Totalize and everything like that, and where we are in Normandy. The context, which I keep hammering on, is so important for understanding anything on the battlefield, but especially in Normandy. But I don't think we have to really do that today. We have two units that are part of Worthington Force. The British Columbia Regiment from Canada's west coast, an armored regiment. It's in its first battle, of course, 4th Canadian Armored Division. This is the first time they've been put on the battlefield. They're very well trained. They're very experienced in knowing what their machines do and how the command structures work and how to do the basics of operations, but it's their first time under fire, and you're always going to have trouble in that first time. They get formed into a battle group with the Algonquin Regiment, which is from the North Bay area of Ontario, sort of our northern part of the province. And again, same thing. They are well-trained infantry battalion. They know their stuff. They're confident in their abilities. They're ready to get into battle. But like the BCR, this is going to be their first time under fire, and that's going to cause problems. There's been a lot of discussion over the years about how Worthington Force got lost. I mean, the idea that you lose a battle group, an entire armored regiment, an infantry battalion in Normandy, just kind of boggles the mind. I mean, how do they to get to a point where nobody knows where they are? I mean, granted, we're not in the 21st century where we have satellites and drones and GPS to keep track of everything, but still, Normandy's not that big. And the idea that this regiment got lost is something that adds a certain mystique to what's going on. C.P. Stacey, the official historian of the Canadian Army, had his view, and he thought that they got lost basically because they were advancing cross country with few landmarks, dealing with opposition, and simply lost its way. He also posits in his official history that there's a road that runs east-west along Estre-la-Campagna. Sorry for my pronunciations. I know they're going to be terrible, but we will persevere with that. And he thinks that they mistook that road for the north-south Conflans highway. That's possible, but I have another idea that I'm going to share with you. And if you've seen my article, you'll know what I'm going to be talking about. We talked a little bit about operations at night with Operation Totalize on Wednesday, how the battle, Simmons' idea was that, well, you have to get the armor across the battlefield and not have it destroyed by German tanks and anti-tank guns. So how do you hide it? Well, let's do it in the dark. And that's what he did. And it worked for the most part. I mean, the first phase of Operation Totalize was extremely successful, crashing through the first German main line of resistance and getting the tanks onto their objectives. However, it was chaotic. It was not a straight line. Units got misdirected. They had to go slowly. They ended up on the wrong objectives. And I suspect that, except for the fact that there were so many things on the battlefield that night, that they couldn't get too lost, but they certainly ended up in the wrong villages on the east side rather than the west side. And there was a lot of misdirection and a lot of confusion. And that was with all sorts of measures in place to make sure they didn't get lost. We talked about the searchlights. We talked about the anti-aircraft guns firing tracer, firing flares onto objectives to guide them, things like that. And they still got lost. So 4th Armored Division was going to try that again on the 8th into the 9th. And we'll see how that went. But
just a quick point, Mike, is and Phil Blood made it, is lots of units get lost in combat. It's just how severe the outcome is of a bit of navigation. We've all read war diaries where someone mistakes one church tower for another church tower, or they, a tributary of a river for the main part of the river, or the first bridge for the second bridge. It's just whether or not that has a long-term implication. But it's yes, you're right saying that today we have all these gadgetry to guide us around there, but getting lost on battlefields is not unique.
Yeah, no, everybody gets lost on the battlefield. I think that's the norm rather than the exception.
Yeah.
I think what's odd about this battle is that they got lost and they stayed lost for a considerable period of time. And we'll talk about all of the opportunities that they had to be found, and I'll use that in air quotes, to be found. And there were so many opportunities for that to happen, and it just didn't happen. And that's the thing that makes you scratch your head on this. So I've got some organization charts. I'll say that I've grabbed all these out of a staff ride handbook that Major John Rickard in the Canadian Army produced a few years ago. Worthington Force staff ride, and if you Google it, you can find it online really easily. And it's a fantastic handbook. It's designed as a training aid for Canadian Army officers to do a staff ride or a toot on Worthington Force. But it's filled with great information. It's got a lot of the raw data, the personal accounts, war diary accounts, and it's filled with tons of maps and diagrams and everything like this. So if you haven't found it yet, go look for that, because I highly recommend it. John's done a fantastic job putting this together. The Algonquin Regiment is standard Canadian infantry, British infantry regiment, 4 companies and a support company. A and D companies ended up not making it to the battle for various reasons. A was left out of battle. D didn't make it, and we'll talk about that. So on the final objective, they really only had B and C and part of the support company. None of the anti-tank guns made it. They were, of course, mounted in half tracks, M14 half tracks to get them there, so they weren't walking. The BCR were a standard infantry regiment, again, 3 squadrons and a headquarters troop. Sherman tanks, 3 regular 75 millimeter gun tanks, and a Firefly in each troop. So it's all very standard there. We'll hear more about the squadron commanders, Major Sidonius, Carson, and Barron, because they all have an important role to play in the battle. And there it is, just a squadron enlarged, 4 troops of 4 tanks each, as you can see. All right, so we had a look at this map quickly last time, and it just gives you the revised plan of Totalize, and I think it's worth putting things up here. Woody, is there a pointer I can use on the screen, or is that not something I can do here? Sorry, you're muted.
No pointer, sorry.
Okay, no worries. But essentially, you can see at the top is the start line for Totalize. The objective where the Canadians were supposed to be going, where the Worthington Force was supposed to be going, is sort of not at the very bottom of the map, but where the circle is. It says 4th Canadian Armored Division, and there's a triangle with 195. Point 195 is what they were going to, what their objective was that day. And just to its right, you can see another triangle with 140, just beside the 12th SS. That is Hill 140. It's very close to the area where they actually ended up, some 6.5 kilometers away. So it wasn't a minor navigation error that they went through. The advance of the 4th Canadian Armored Division and the Poles as well to the start line on the 8th of August was slow, to say the least. We talked about this last time. It was going through a battlefield, an active battlefield that was churned up by bombs and artillery. There were still elements of the Germans at play that were taking pot shots at them. More than once, the BCR and the Algonquins had to stop and deal with opposition, knock out a machine gun or a small group of German soldiers that were taking pot shots at them before they could carry on. And there was also a pretty massive traffic jam. There wasn't a lot of place to go. There was no room to deploy and everything like that. So the 8th was a very long day for the men of Worthington Force trying to get there. Brad, you're getting ahead of us here. We will get there. That's a really great story. It's probably one that's deserving of its own story, looking at the Argylls and their night march up the actual Hill 195. By the morning of the 9th, this is where 4th Armored Division was supposed to be. The Poles were supposed to be back in Cavicourt, up at the top of the map. The Canadian Grenadier Guards and the Lake Superior Regiment, known as Halpenny Force, after the commander of the Canadian Grenadier Guards, was supposed to be in Bretteville-le-Rabais, and the Worthington Force troops were supposed to be way down at the bottom of the map in Hill 195. But of course, this was what was supposed to happen, and it didn't happen. So the big photo with the 3 guys in the middle is Lieutenant Colonel Worthington, who commanded the BCR. So one of the things that I did in a former life was work at the Laurier Center for Military Strategic and Disarmament Studies. And one of the great treasures of that research center is a huge collection of aerial photographs from the Second World War. Long story on how they came into possession of the center. But essentially, it was a collection of, well, we estimate somewhere between 200 and 300,000 Second World War aerial reconnaissance photos that had been in possession of probably HQ, 1st Canadian Army, and cover most of the areas where the Canadians fought in the Second World War. Lots of Normandy, of the Channel ports, of the Scheldt, up into Holland, and even a little bit into Germany. And it's an absolutely amazing resource, especially because a lot of the photos were taken on or near the time of a battle happening. So not only do you get to see the terrain, the actual terrain they were dealing with, but oftentimes you get to see it in the equivalent of real time, and you can see stuff happening on the battlefield. You can see changes over time on the battlefield as it gets churned up by artillery or bomber strikes and things like that. And one of my big jobs was cataloging this collection, because when it came to Laurier, it was just a whole lot of boxes and nobody really had any idea what was in there. So for a few summers, my job was just to poke through these boxes, try to find something that looked familiar. And once I'd found a town or a river or something like that, then I could start cataloging what was in that box. And over the years, I'd found some really neat stuff. But I think this one stands head and shoulders above all the others in terms of a Eureka moment, because I was looking at this series of air photos that were all taken on, well, lo and behold, the 9th of August, 1944. What day is that? Ding, ding, ding. Totalize, Worthington Force, everything like that. And there's this battlefield, and you can see a lot of stuff going on in this slide. There's if you zoom in on that little square, I didn't do it on this one. Sometimes I've got zoom ups, but not on this one. There's a 4-gun 88 anti-aircraft, anti-tank battery there that gave trouble to Worthington Force on the night of the 8th and early on the morning of the 9th. That is very clearly discussed in the records, and you can zoom in and it's right there. The 4 guns are easily seen. The other thing you can see on this air photo is that there's a lot of confusion. You can see a lot of tracks. You can see a lot of tracks circling. Those half circles are what are going on, and everything like that. So I started looking at it, but I hadn't really had the eureka moment. I just knew that, hey, this is pretty neat. There's a lot going on here. Before we go on with those air photos, and this is another photo from the collection. Some of them are vertical air photos, which are taken looking straight down, and others are oblique, which are kind of taken at an angle and let you see off in the distance as if you're up in a plane or a balloon looking over the battlefield. And this one is looking to the south along the Conflays Highway. You can see it as that prominent line going up and down in the thing. The prominent line crisscrossing is a problem of the developing. That's not actually something that's there. It confused me for a long time before I figured that out. But the arrows there are showing the approximate route that that Worthington Force was supposed to take, basically down the highway, and then at some point they were going to cross back over the highway and make for the high point at point 195. Well, the area sort of where that pink arrow is where they kind of got bounced out to, partly because of that anti-aircraft gun battery that they had trouble with, partly because of other German resistance that was coming from Bretteville, Surlays, Lalays at that point. And they ended up getting bumped out farther to the left. But they said, okay, that's no problem. We'll just go out farther to the left. We'll do a bigger hook and we'll still get back to point 195. Well, unfortunately, they got really misdirected. Instead of making a big hook, you can see the arrow on the right is going past Kesnay Wood to point 195. Instead, they ended up going almost 45 degrees in the wrong direction to a point that ended up right where the battle group ended up. And that's the big question. How do you get that misdirected at night?
It's something that's worth reminding ourselves, for those who haven't been to Normandy, that we're not talking about a bit of high ground rising up like the monastery on top of the hill at Monte Cassino. We're talking about a generally undulatingly flat area with slight rises that are prominent, but you don't really know even when you're standing on them, you don't really feel that you're like on a summit of anything, do you?
No, they're just gentle folds in the hill, and they're very significant militarily. But for the average person driving across the countryside, it's just those sort of beautiful rolling hills that you really don't pay much attention to. You're kind of going up and down, and there's a lot of dead ground there. There's a lot of stuff going on. I had a really interesting experience when I was doing the battlefield guides for Normandy, and I went over at one point to take photographs of the battlefield, and I rented a Cessna 172 to go up and take some photos from the air of the battles. And if you look at the Normandy battlefield guide that Terry Kopp and I did, you'll see those photos in there. And it was a neat experience, one, to fly over Normandy, but two, because we took off from Carpiquet Airfield. And as soon as we got in the air, I could see the coastline. I could see the Mulberry Harbor at Arromanches. I could pick up Courseulles and Bernier and so forth. And it was really easy to landmark and know where I was. We went north. We flew up to Arromanches, turned to the right, flew along the coast till we got to Ouistreham, and then flew down the Caen Canal and up over Caen. And again, it's so easy. Pegasus Bridge is easy to pick out, stuff like that. Get over Caen and it starts changing. There's no longer any bodies of water to landmark by. The first thing I wanted to photograph was Verrières Village, and we had a heck of a time finding it. We had to circle around a couple times till we found it. And after that, I told my pilot that I wanted to go to the Canadian cemetery at Bretteville, and he said, "Sure, no problem." Headed off. A few minutes later, we found ourselves over the cemetery, the Polish cemetery. He'd gone to the wrong one. So we had to circle back and fly a little bit north, went back to the Canadian cemetery and took photos, and that was fine. Then I guess he was running low on fuel, so we had to go to Falaise, and we sat down at Falaise to fuel. And we were going to finish up by going down to Saint-Lambert-sur-Dives. And I'm like, great. So we go down there, and we couldn't find it to save our lives. He was from the area. He knew the the train from the ground, but we couldn't find Saint Lambert. The only way we actually found it was it happened that a buddy of his was up in the air at the same time, and he radioed him, and he came zooming down in front of us, and we played Follow the Leader to Saint Lambert. And the experience was a real eye-opener for me, because it really sort of gave me a better idea of what it was like for the Typhoon pilots and the Spitfire pilots, because here we were flying low and slow on a beautiful sunny afternoon, and we were having trouble finding not tanks and trees or camouflage guns, but entire villages. We couldn't find the bloody things, and nobody was shooting at us. And you have to think about the job the attack air pilots had when they're flying fast. They're flying high to avoid small arms fire, and trying to find these pinpoint locations that the Army wants them to hit. And the fact that they found anything at all is really pretty amazing. So yeah, it's tough to navigate. And the experience of being in a tank buttoned up and going over a battlefield at night with smoke and dust and people shooting at you probably isn't that much different in terms of trying to orient yourself. So sorry, it's a little rabbit hole I went down, but
no, great. It was very informative. Loved it.
Keep going. But this is just another perspective of the map to show you where they were supposed to go down the highway and make a right turn, their right, not our left, to 195, which is at the bottom. But that's where they ended up going. So you can see it's, well, maybe not 45 degree, but a 30-degree difference to a hill at 111. Sort of southeast of Estrella Campania, and it's a difference of about 6.5 kilometers. So huge difference, and far enough away that maybe if they'd been a kilometer or two from their objective, they might have been found more easily. But the fact that they were so far away made it very difficult to get to them. So here was my Eureka moment. And this is an air photo that is sort of the next one in line from that other one that I was showing you before. You can still see the confused array of tracks and circling and everything like that are taking place on the left side of that air photograph. But if you look in the circle, you can see that the lines kind of coalesce. They head to that section of long straight road, and as soon as they cross that road, they immediately make a right-hand turn and they follow that road. And I've got the entire track of air photos following that. And it's very clear. They go straight on that bearing all the way down to the hill at 111 where they end up and spend most of their time on the 9th. So I'm looking at this, and for me, this was really the Eureka moment, because it makes sense. It makes sense in that what they were intending to do was to sort of push out to the left, circle around Bretteville, then find the Conflans Highway again, cross over it, and once you cross over it, you go straight for Hill 195. This road they found was not the Conflans Highway; it was the Chemin Assez de Guillaume. It was the straight road of William the Conqueror. And it was a road that he had made to honor an escape he had over cross country, and he'd sort of bored this straight road through the Normandy countryside. And if anybody's been to Normandy, you know that there aren't too many roads that go straight. They tend to go around and up and down and around and everything like that. The Conflans Highway is an exception, and this short section of the Chemin Assez is another one. So I think that in the confusion of the night and the confusion of the battle, looking out from the slits on their tanks, because of course they would have been buttoned up because they're being shot at, they found this stretch of a wide, straight highway, or what seemed to be a highway. They crossed over it, and they realized, finally, we're back on our location. So they started heading along that, thinking, okay, we're back on track. They had to carry on, and that air photo is there. You can see that essentially the road going diagonal across your thing is the Chemin Assez going through there. This is a photo I took of it about 5 years ago, and you can see that it's not an impressive highway like the Conflans Road is, but it is a stretch of long, wide highway that probably would have seemed like that for the men at the time. And in the distance, at the sort of just to the right of the road, you can see that wood that's 4 or 5 kilometers in the distance. Just over that hill is where they ended up. And I think what happened is that they're going through the night. They've got questions about where they are. They're not sure. But as the sun rises, they see this height of land right in front of them, exactly where it's supposed to be. And of course, it is 0.195 because everything is lining up. It makes sense. So they make for it, and that's where they dig in. Of course, it's not 195, and that's the problem. So again, this is looking to the west, showing 195 in the distance.
We have a question from Phil Blood. Were they not taking bearings? Because although the distances and the layout of the roads seemed right, they're clearly, as you said, kind of 45 degrees out. So were they not taking bearings?
Yeah, that's a question I had as well, because it seems like a really simple thing. You pull out your compass and you look at your bearings, and you know you're going this way when you're supposed to be going this way. That makes sense, but the way it was explained to me is that taking a bearing in a tank moving at night was difficult. It was difficult to see. The face of the compass is bouncing around, and it's not terribly accurate because you're in this great big metal contraption that is throwing off the bearing. So the best way to do it is to take your compass, get out and look at it, but that's not happening during the course of the night. So yeah, it seems like it would be a simple solution, but that's something that didn't happen. So just the order of march of Worthington Force. They've got the advance guard with C Squadron, the regimental headquarters with Colonel Hay, the commander of the Algonquins, and Lieutenant Colonel Worthington is in the middle. Then it's B Company, and A Company is following up at the rear. Just some photos of the men in happier times. So this is another one of the air photos. You can see in the sort of the top left corner is the chemin Assez. You can see where the tracks cross the road and immediately turn 90 degrees to the right and then follow through. This was still a defended battlefield by the Germans. It was no longer their main line of resistance, but there were penny packets of German troops across this battlefield. Nobody that gave a real accounting, but the advance was stalled a few times as a anti-tank gun opened up from a tree line, or a platoon of troops or section of troops opened up from a village, so they had to stop and deal with it and everything like that. But it didn't really slow down the front part of the column. We can zero in on some of this, and the level of detail is amazing here. You're looking at it, it looks like a whole bunch of shell holes, but if you focus in, you can see there's a bunch of tanks that have probably been knocked out at this point in the battlefield, and you get a sense that something has happened here. Don't know for sure that they're Shermans, but I'm 95% sure those are some of the BCR Shermans that were knocked out back there. Lieutenant Wilson's troop was part of Carson's B Squadron, and Carson, who commanded B Squadron, kind of had the idea that they were on the wrong bearing and they needed to go somewhere else, but he was never able to convince Worthington of that fact. At one point, he sent off Wilson's troop to the right to 195 to recce it and figure out if that's where they needed to be. And of course, Carson was right. Wilson made it to Saint-Hilaire Farm, which is sort of just in the shadow of 0.195, but they never were able to communicate that to anybody that was able to make a difference, and basically went back, and that was their story. A Squadron and D Company of the Algonquins were the last in line, and the A Squadron story is really not a happy one. They were basically traversing the battlefield as dawn was breaking, and German defenses began to move in to plug the hole, and also some positions that had been bypassed came alive, and A Squadron was essentially decimated on the battlefield. There was one account by Lieutenant Stock, who was part of B Company, and he said he looked back and he said he'd always heard about Sherman tanks being called Ronsons and hadn't understand why. And as he was looking through his binoculars, he saw one of the A Squadron Shermans get hit, and there was just this huge column of flames that came up through the crew commander's hole in the top of the turret, and that was the end of that tank, and it burned furiously. D Company had been behind A Squadron in the line of march and didn't really get involved in that fight. They tried to come up to help A Squadron, but were basically waved back, saying there's nothing you can do, head back. So D Squadron basically stopped at that point and moved back. And again, that's another one of those, we'll go through them a little more carefully later, but why didn't D Squadron tell somebody this is the direction they went? This is where you can find them. Always love when you get marketers calling in the middle of a presentation. So this is another photo. This is a Strela Campania, where the Poles would end up later in the day. And again, if you look in on this air photo, there are many, many, many things that you can focus in on, showing destroyed tanks or half tracks or whatever. In other cases, you can zoom in and you can actually see the vehicles are still burning. So up in the top right, there's 2 vehicles on the road and one just south of that wood line that is burning furiously, and then the 3 on the left are also looks like they're starting to be done burning, but they are definitely on fire and most likely Shermans at that point. So the other Eureka moment I had on this was when I actually found the Alamo, the area where Worthington Force ended up, because I'd read all this stuff about it, and I'm like, be really neat to see that at some point. And then I found this air photo, and you look in the bottom right corner, and there's the rectangular wood, or like rectangular field. It's about 100 meters wide by 300 meters long. It's got trees and hedges that surround the rectangular field. But if you zoom in on it and look closely, there is Worthington Force. There are the BCR, and there are the Algonquins all arrayed along the perimeter of that field. The tanks are behind the hedge lines. The half tracks are there as well. They've taken the machine guns out of those and mounted them in the hedge lines to provide extra fire. You can see the sort of half wheels where Sherman tanks have turned around. You can see the foxholes that have been dug. The level of detail here is just absolutely incredible, and it really gives you a better sense than anything else of what was going on with Worthington Force when they were in this field. And it's really quite remarkable. You can even see where Worthington's tank was. Right in the center, there's a little wood, and just below that, there's a tank that's perpendicular to it. That's the spot that he formed up his RHQ, and that is Worthington's tank right there. And we'll come back to this image a few times. So if anybody's been to Normandy and been to the Worthington Force Memorial, this is a photo that I took right from the sort of the back corner of it. And the very first time I was here, actually the first few times I was here was first time was in '95, and we had a hell of a time finding it. And I guess that kind of goes with Worthington Force getting lost. We certainly got lost trying to find it, and that was in the days before GPS. We were just trying to navigate by map and had a heck of a time finding our way there, but we eventually got there. And the memorial is on the side of a road. It's the east-west road, and if you go to the back corner, you can look out over the field where the Worthington Force Alamo was. Again, just another photograph of the wheat fields leading up to it. This is a modern Google map image, satellite map image of the battlefield. The east-west road is at the top. That is the field. It's no longer has the hedges and trees around the perimeter of the field, but it's still very easy to make out the shape of the field from the air. And then just at the top is where the Worthington Force Memorial is, about 250 meters from the Alamo. So once Worthington Force got established in the place in that field, there's a big question about whether Worthington knew if he was in the right place or if he knew he was in the wrong place. I tend to lean towards he got there and he knew that thought he was in the right place, but had some question marks. I think as day broke, he got a sense that they were not in the right place. But at that point, they just had to make the best they could of the situation they were in. In fact, they were in a really good spot defensively. It was on a piece of high ground. It has great vision, 360 degrees around the position. The only thing they were missing was artillery. And I firmly believe that if the battle group had been known, its location had been known, and they had the FOOs effectively in communications with their artillery battalions, that this would have been the grand story of the Normandy campaign. It wouldn't have been a case of the destruction of the battle group. It would be about the battle group that broke through the Germans and finally kicked the door wide open. But
I just want to jump in on that the process of finding out you're in the wrong place, because I would imagine in that situation it would go through several stages of like someone, I think we might be in the wrong place, then kind of denial, then kind of disbelief, then a bit of kind of panic, and then sort of the final realization. I don't think you would just like switch and go, oh, we're in the wrong place. It would go through a process of, well, we can't be. No, how can, and then kind of people passing the buck and blame. Is that what you kind of think happened? That it was sort of an evolution over a period of even hours where the realization was, we really are in the wrong place.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. I think Worthington was very, I don't know Worthington. I don't know his personality. We don't have those stories to tell, and we certainly don't have his account because he was killed during the battle. But I think he was quite sure that they were going in the right direction and were in the right place. I think his squadron commanders, especially Carson and Barron, had a much better sense that maybe something was wrong here. How they weren't able to communicate that to Worthington, I guess, is something we're also not going to know because they were killed in the battle as well. And we don't have their accounts. But yeah, I don't know. And then, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we'll talk about how I think they should have known what was going on and sort of all the missed opportunities to identify their location.
Because we had the question earlier, Mike, about was Worthington the kind of CEO who listened to subordinates? But from what I understand from reading is that we just don't really have enough of a character profile.
Worthington was killed. His brother was killed soon after. I know he was well liked. I know he's a very popular commander, loved by his men. But I don't know what his personality was like. I don't know what he was like as a commander. I would love to know those details, but I don't have those that kind of an insight into his character to make any kind of useful comment on that. But I do know that once he got there, he was obviously a good commander. He arranged his troops in a very good defensive position, and he didn't just sit on his hands. He was looking to improve his position. They got in there. They knew that A Squadron had been destroyed behind them. They understood that they were in bandit country, that they were surrounded by Germans because they were taking fire from all sides. They were taking some fire, especially from that northeastern quadrant. So he sent out a troop of tanks early in the morning, soon after they arrived, probably around 7:30, maybe 7:45, to go deal with some German guns that were shooting at them from the north. And you can see what happened to those 4 tanks. All 4 of them were brewed up. I think the 4th one is just to the left, but I can't confirm that, so I didn't circle it. So that was his sort of first attempt to deal with his situation. The second one is a really interesting one because in front of him, essentially it's a big wide open field, but it's gently rising to a point where in the bottom right-hand corner of that red square is a small wood. It's labeled as 30-acre wood on modern topographic maps. I'm not sure if it had a name at the time, but Worthington looked at that and he thought that was a really important piece of tactical ground, that just over the hill behind the wood was some dead ground, and he didn't really know what was going on there. And his fear was that the Germans would be able to marshal in that area for a counterattack that he wouldn't be able to see in time. So he sent B Squadron out to capture that point, 2 troops, as well as Major Carson and his headquarters troop, our headquarters tanks, to go deal with that. And the troops got there to that tank, but discovered it was fairly strongly held by a couple of sections of infantry supported by anti-tank guns. The main German positions on the battlefield were at Quesnay Wood, which was to the west, and another wood that was farther to the east. There wasn't a lot of big guns right in front, but of course the Panther and the Tiger both had a gun that could easily reach out and touch you in a way that wasn't very comforting. So they were taking fire from long range, and there wasn't much they could do about it. The tanks got into the 30-acre wood and started taking fire. They were dealing with the infantry in there, but one by one, the Shermans of B Squadron were knocked out. And again, this is a photograph the RAF must have made within a few minutes, maybe half an hour after the engagement, because you can clearly see the 4 tanks of the lead troop that are there. The 3 are burning, the 2 in the middle burning furiously. So they've obviously been hit not too long before. The thing I think is really remarkable about this story is that even though all their tanks were knocked out, Major Carson and his men didn't give up. They got out of their tanks, they grabbed their Tommy guns and other things like hand grenades, and they attacked that wood and cleared out a fairly strong position of German infantry that were in there before they started to make their way back to the main battle group point back in well, we'll call it the Alamo. One of the tank commanders, an Aboriginal sergeant named Wallbank, had his foot blown off. He was a runner. He might have been an Olympic runner before the war, but he had one of his feet blown off and was working to crawl back. And luckily, he was able to get some help and survive. But yeah, it was tough stories all around. Some of the more interesting stuff that we're finding that I found on these air photographs, if you look off to the east, this is an area where the Canadians weren't, and you can see lots of tracks over there, treads circling around in the fields, and it's very clear that these were the Germans that were maneuvering to get a shot at Worthington Force. And even more interesting, there's a close-up of that one to the top. But if you look just below that, you can see we've actually captured a photo of probably a Panther tank. Impossible to know with this kind of resolution, but most of the German Tigers were in Kesney Wood to the west, and the Panthers had been sent on a wide arc to the south and around to attack back from the east. And 99% sure this is one of the Panthers that is firing at Worthington Force from this position.
Just a quick question that people are chatting in the sidebar. If they were on the hill they were supposed to be on, what was the original set of orders? Were they supposed to occupy it, call up for reinforcements, move on to targets and other objectives? What was the original plan?
Yeah, well, essentially yes to all of that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah,
Worthington Force was supposed to capture the objective, dig in, and be prepared to repel counterattacks, because as we know, the Germans love to counterattack, and the best way to kill Germans is to get them coming out and attacking you. They had 3 regiments of artillery that were supporting them. They had 5 FUs with the battle group, 2 from 23rd and 19th Field Regiments. They were self-propelled M7 or Sexton regiments, and also a British medium regiment, number 11 regiment, that had 5.5-inch guns. So that's a fairly substantial amount of firepower that they would have had on call to deal with any kind of counterattacks, and they would have been fine at point 19 or at Hill 195 to use that. Plus, they would have had other artillery resources that they could call on to defeat them. Halpenny Force was then supposed to reinforce them afterwards and hold on to that, and then depending on the situation, they could either hold and deal with counterattacks, or if there was limited resistance, they could continue to exploit south. So that was the way it was supposed to work. As we know, it didn't quite turn out that way.
And just for clarification, where is it? Jeff had asked earlier what German units were actually in contact with Worthington Force at that time. You've mentioned Panther tanks. Do we know the sizes and the designations?
Yeah, I don't know the exact details. Let me go back. I've got a slide way back. It was 12th SS.
Yeah,
is one of them. Almost there. There. So it was battle group Vonscha.
Yeah.
That was the main battle group there. And I believe that's part of 12th SS. In Kesney position, they certainly had Tigers. The circle to the right is where the Panthers had moved over. As the day went on, they were bringing up more infantry and artillery to deal with the position. This was exactly, the battle was exactly what the Canadians had hoped to accomplish, and the reaction they'd hoped to draw. The only thing missing was artillery. If they had artillery, it would have been a totally different outcome. As it was, the battle group accounted really well for itself during the course of the day. They were on their own from, well, basically 8 a.m., 7:30 in the morning when they arrived until the last elements left about 12 hours later. And the Germans hadn't been able to get into the position. There were counterattack after counterattack launched, waves of 1 to 200 infantry coming across the field, supported by Panthers and long-range fire from the Tigers and lots of artillery. And they were all repulsed, and some of them were repulsed in quite a bloody manner. So, yeah, the battle group is powerful. It's got a lot of guns with the Sherman tanks and the 17-pounders and all of the rifles of the Algonquins and the machine guns from the half-tracks. There's a lot of firepower there. And even on their own, they were able to hold out for the better part of a day. It would have been quite different if they'd had the big guns supporting them.
Thank you.
I don't know if I can just...
You can skip to a numbered slide if you know what number you're going to.
I'm getting close. That's a little better. All right, so let's talk about the RAF, because I can't come on the show without talking about the Air Force.
And Norma's been like a fan waiting, shouting out requests at the DJ. Norma is waiting for stuff about the RAF and Worthington Force and Red Smoke and blah blah blah. Requested artillery and Air Force. So yeah, Norma's waiting for everything.
Oh, we love Norma. Glad she's here. So this is a really interesting case study in how close air support works, in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and there's a lot on both sides of the equation here. First off, I said we'd return to this photo, and this is a really interesting photograph from the perspective of coordination with the Air Force, because of course Worthington Force has no way to communicate with the aircraft up above. That wouldn't have been any different whether they were lost or found. But what they have done as soon as they arrived was they put out their aerial recognition panels to tell the Air Force, hey, we're friendly, don't shoot at us. So if you look in the center of the photo, you can see there's these white rectangular panels, 2 of them, and a long stripe. I believe it's yellow, but it could be white. I'm not 100% sure of that. And those were the air recognition panels that the battle group put out to say to aircraft that we were friendly. Soon after they arrived on the battle group position, they were attacked by typhoons. The typhoons made a couple of attacks. Luckily, they didn't cause any death or destruction, and they were able to pop smoke and warn the aircraft off. And they quickly got a waggle of the wings from the aircraft that recognized that, hey, these are friendly troops, we're not going to attack them. And so they stopped, and for the rest of the day, they supported the battle group there. They one account says that they were coming back fairly regularly on half-hour intervals to support them. They were attacking German positions that were to the south and the east and the west. On at least one occasion, and maybe a couple, they had showed up at exactly the right time to hit the Germans when they were out in the open and diffuse a counterattack and potentially save the battle group. And the RAF was extremely helpful during the course of that day, which is really important. But again, it brings one of those, and the other thing is that the one thing that John Rickard found in doing his staff ride handbook is that around noon, the bomb line was actually changed to incorporate the location of Worthington Force. So the bomb line is, of course, an invisible line on the map that tells the Air Force, on this side of the line, you can attack everything. On this side of the line, you can't attack anything. And the first bomb line that went out in the morning was well behind Worthington Force, having them out in bandit country. But by noon, that line had been updated, and it showed that they were within the bomb line. So raises a big question. Who updated that line based on what intelligence? You would think that the RAF pilots would get back to their base and they would say, hey, you know what? We were out flying and we found some friendly troops where they weren't supposed to be. Does anybody know anything about that? And then that message would get passed up the chain, and somebody would tweak in, maybe even get back to General Kitching, the commander of 4th Armored Division, to say, hey, those are our guys. We're missing them. Thanks for letting us know. But that was never communicated. They communicated it to whoever updated the bomb line, but it didn't have any help in actually locating that battle group.
And I mean, in the 2 months previously, or 3 months nearly, I mean, there'd have been surely lots of occasions of Allied units flying over a battlefield that's slightly different below them from what they had been told. So, I mean, if you went back every single time and reported every single minor difference, I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here. You know, when you're actually meant to be reporting the purpose of your mission and loss and things, because battlefields by the nature of them are changing and evolving all the time, and you know, pilots would be aware that a situation below them has changed since the briefing they got. So I wonder why they didn't say anything, but at the same time I kind of think, yeah, they just were, yeah, it's a snafu, it's not our problem, don't mention it.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I don't disagree with you there, but I think in the case of Worthington Force, they were so far off the map that we're not talking like a few hundred yards or a kilometer or 2 kilometers. We're talking 4 or 5 kilometers in advance of where they're supposed to be. Normandy up until this point has been a game of inches and yards. They're not making grand sweeping advances at this point in the campaign yet. So to have a friendly battle group that far over the bomb line really should have set up a red flare for them, saying, who is this and why are they there, and why weren't we told about that? And
fair point. Okay.
So, yeah, so the guns, I know Sheldrake will be interested in this. Like I said, there were 2 self-propelled field regiments, 23rd and 19, with their guns, and there was also a field battery, a field regiment of medium guns that were there. They were set up in positions to be able to hit Hill 195 at sort of the maximum range of their guns. They had to move at some point during the day. One of the regiments, and I'm going to mess it up, I think it was 19th, but it could have been 23rd, pulled an oopsie, that when they relocated, somebody mixed up their map reference and took them back towards Caen instead of forward where they were supposed to be. So they took themselves right out of the battle. They would have been out of the battle if it was at 195 or at the Alamo, but that made a mess. 11. Sorry, my dog is running in right now. The medium regiment was at sort of a maximum range, but they could possibly have supported the battle group in the middle of it, but they didn't know where they were the whole time, and that's also doubly interesting because 2 of the FOOs were in communication with their regiments over the radio net, talking to them at a number of points during the day. The regiments were firing smoke shells, saying, we fired, tell us where you see it, and we'll redirect. And there was silence, and they were firing at 195, and had no idea that they were 6.5 kilometers from where they were, so nobody could see anything that was going on, and they never made that connection during the course of the day. So this is a slide that's kind of got some of the communications that were going in and out of the battle group while they were there, and there was a lot of them. The artillery, as I'd mentioned, were talking back and forth. Baker, who was the FOO with I think 19th Field, 19th Field, was in communications with his regiment right up until 6:30 at night, 1830 hours. Worthington himself was in communications with his rear link as well during the course of the day, but he kept sending updates that he was on Hill 195. He was sure for quite a long time that he was on 195. He was also talking to his RSM Jay, who was in charge of the rear headquarters, and especially bringing up reinforcements of ammunition and things like that. And at one point he set out to resupply the battle group, and he actually went in the right direction, which means that somebody had told him where he should be, but that never worked out. There was also German wireless intercepts that 1st Canadian Army was catching from the airwaves, showing that the Germans were dealing with something happening in the area that turned out to be where Worthington Force was happening. And there were some questions asked about what the hell are these Germans dealing with, because it's not our guys, it's not the Poles. Who could it possibly be? But that never either sent up that flare that said, oh, I wonder what's going on there. Maybe that's our missing battle group, but that nobody ever made that connection. D Company of the Algonquins, of course, had been following with A Squadron and never made it there. But when they went back, they should have been able to tell what was going on and what direction they'd went. The Armored Car Regiment was on the battlefield and should have had a sense. The Poles are a really interesting story because they're advancing behind the Canadians. In effect, when Worthington Force made their misdirection, they'd cut across the lines of advance of where the Poles were supposed to be. And there were a number of times when the Poles and Worthington Force were not in communications per se, but they could certainly see each other. The Poles had fired on Worthington Force on a number of occasions, and the Canadians were able to get across that, hey, no, we're friendly, don't shoot at us. But somehow the Poles never passed that message back to say, hey, we've got some of your guys in front of us, maybe want to tell us what they're doing here. That message never went. And I know there were some pretty severe communications issues with the Poles because of their lack of English. They had liaison officers that were there to help out, but the rank and file of the Poles often didn't have good English language skills, which created communications problems. So that should have been that was a problem in this case. We talked about the RAF. Brigadier Lane was the Commander Royal Artillery for 4th Armored Division. And at one point, he got up in a light aircraft, an Oster, and flew up over the battlefield to see if he could find them. And he flew straight down the Conflans Highway, looking at point 195, but he couldn't see them. I believe that he may have saw smoke over in the direction of where Worthington was, but he discounted it because it was just so far off the track that it couldn't possibly have been who he was looking for. And then there was a couple of parties that made it out of the battle group area during the course of the day. After that attack on 30 Acre Wood, Worthington collected all the wounded that were ambulatory and put them on the half tracks and sent them back at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And essentially they followed the route straight back the way they had come. One of the half tracks was destroyed by a German anti-tank gun, but the rest made it back. So why are they not telling the story? And late in the day, around 3 o'clock, we think Worthington ordered the remaining tanks that were mobile to make a breakout as well. And again, most of them made it out and made it back as well. And again, nobody was telling the story. So it's all really it makes you scratch your head saying, just what if? What if those guys escaping at 10 a.m. had got back and had gotten in contact with the artillery, and they would have been able to rejig things and get the Worthington Force in communication with the guns and under an umbrella of artillery fire? What if? It screams, oh my God, it was so close to happening. If you have a look at John Rickard's staff ride guide, he's identified no less than 15 separate occasions where communications had made it back from the Worthington Force that should have been able to give an indication of where they were, but somehow nobody was able to connect the dots and find the lost.
It's kind of the perfect storm. These classic moments in history of things going wrong, and I'm just kind of pulling random ones out the air, like the assassination of Kennedy, I don't know, and Custer. They always end up being with a kind of perfect storm of one thing that follows another thing that follows another thing, of kind of somewhere between coincidence and bad luck and just a human judgment, errors and judgment. And then you just kind of analyze it and realize that they just seem to happen every now and then, these things where there is no real rational explanation for why all these things happen. It just is. It's one of those situations where somehow this one error seems to lead to another one, and it becomes this domino effect, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's just like there's just so many occasions when the story could have been different. And I guess the thing that gets me the most is that on this day, Worthington Force accomplished exactly what everybody's screaming at the Canadians and the British that they don't do, which is conduct this armored spearhead, go
be
for
bold.
broke, break through, go hellbent for leather, and achieve that breakthrough. And that's exactly what they did on this day. They exploited against their doctrine at night through enemy country to get onto a key piece of terrain, and they did it. They got there and they dug in. And if only they'd had that artillery, like I said, this would be a totally different story. We would be talking about, there'd be movies made of Worthington Force, and we'd have books, because this would have been that case of breaking through, because the Germans would have battered themselves to death trying to plug that hole in the dike. And they would have...
we did a chat with Don Fox a few days ago about 4th Armored, pretty much the same dates as this, in August, doing this sort of breakout into Brittany, where they're doing this sort of bold thing, going off with tanks and motorized infantry sort of beyond where they're supposed to, and it ending up working out with kind of TN medals and success, and the same thing happens here, and through various circumstances doesn't. It's interesting that these, again, the differences between success and failure can be very, very tiny.
It's just on the edge of
and disaster. It's what makes it fascinating, tragically fascinating.
Yeah, tragically fascinating, exactly. Like the opportunity here was so huge that if only they'd been found, if only somebody had tweaked that this was the Canadians and got them the support they needed. Got helping force up there to support them, got them in connection with the Poles, because the Poles were taking really heavy losses trying to advance forward at this point as well. And it's just, nobody was talking. Nobody knew what was going on. It was left hand, right hand didn't know what the other was doing, and we ended up where we are. So the toll is terrible in this battle. 240 total casualties. The BCR lost 47 tanks during the course of the day. BCR had 40 men killed in total, a number wounded, and more than 30 taken prisoner of war that were captured, mostly wounded men that had been left behind at the end of the day. The Algonquins were about the same, 128 total casualties, 45 prisoners of war, and the same number of men killed. And it's just a terrible story. I mean, the tales of heroism as they got out of there are legion. As I'd mentioned, Worthington was killed late in the day, maybe around 5:30, when a shell, probably a mortar shell, landed right beside him, and fragments stuck him in the head. Colonel Hay, the commander of the Algonquins, had been severely wounded earlier in the day and had been evacuated. The squadron commanders were either killed or severely wounded at this point. It was down to, I believe it was Major Monk, who was one of the Algonquin company commanders, that was in charge of the battle group at the end. And essentially after the tanks had left sort of late afternoon, everybody else just hunkered down and continued to knock off the German counterattacks as they came. And then when the sun set, they began to infiltrate out and essentially crawled all the way back to Allied lines, and made it there by the dawn the next morning, and successfully exfiltrated. Love this quote from the British foo. He says, "I hope that if I'm ever in a party like this again, I will have Canadians around me." And I think that's a pretty fair summary of what happened this day. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong, but in spite of it, the battle group gave as good as they took. And we don't have any sense of German casualties, but they were undoubtedly heavy. Tanks destroyed, men killed, everything like that. I know you talked to Kurt Meyer, and he's like, we didn't take any casualties, and he says there was no RAF that day and stuff like that. But he is not exactly an honest broker in talking about what happened on the battlefield. So I discount more of what he says than believe it.
Here we automatically discount. Well, we don't automatically discount the SS, but we take everything they say with a huge grain of salt. Barrel of salt. Yeah,
absolutely. If you go there today, there's a beautiful memorial there with the memorial cross, and on each side is a small little plaque that gives you a sort of a basic idea of what was going there. But it's sacred ground as far as I'm concerned to go there and have a look and everything like that.
Yeah.
C'est tout fini.
Très bien. Well, we've got some questions and comments, so we'll do that. Thank you very much. Absolutely amazing stuff, and I know it doesn't really matter in the long term when people find this show in 2 years' time, but the fact we're doing it 80 years on right now feels kind of special. So there's a combination of comments and questions. So what you were saying about this being exactly what the Allies should be doing more of, and particularly North American historians kind of beating the British and American. Well, I mean North America being American, bashing the Brits and Canadians for not being bold enough, not doing this. And Terry Downs says this is what happens when you shift from a step-by-step battle to the flexible breakout exploitation phase. And this is, as I said a minute ago, this is what's happening. Where the Don Fox was talking about the Fourth Army. We're evolving now. The Allies are they're on the front foot now. But as you're doing that, you're changing this step-by-step approach that they've been restricted in the hedgerows of Americans, and because of the stubbornness of the German defense around Caen, is that now there is this chance to kind of be a bit bold, but the army is moving forward at slightly different speeds, and different divisional commanders are kind of getting up with the program on different days and different weeks, and it's a complicated time for the Allies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess maybe it's worth turning to the point that Brad had mentioned earlier about the actual capture of Hill 195, which was accomplished by the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, who did it on the night of the 9th of August and into the 10th. And what they did was absolutely remarkable. The infantry regiment did a silent march at night. They sent their scouts ahead. They marked it out with white tape, and then they silently walked through what was a fairly heavily defended area of that the Germans had defended. I mean, the Germans were in Quesnay Wood just to their left, and there were elements of the Germans on Hill 195, and Canadians basically just quietly walked through them all, got themselves onto Hill 195 along with anti-tank guns, dug in, and when dawn broke, they basically said, here we are, and they had artillery coverage and dealt with the Germans, who tried very hard to get them off that hill and were unable to. But it's really a remarkable success story. That's quite an antidote to the Worthington Force story.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions about the Germans. Bad Cat was saying earlier on, what did the Germans think of this attack? And the other comment was the Germans must have been surprised by the absence of Allied artillery support, because although they wouldn't have cared initially, they wouldn't have known that this was a force going to the wrong place. They'd just been dealing with the fact there's a force of Allied tanks coming towards them. But within a period of time, they'd have realized, hang on, why is the artillery not coming in? Why is the close air support coming? Why is this not being followed up, as all Allied attacks were, by this overwhelming big war? So you mentioned Meyer there, who, as we said, is a bit of an unreliable witness, but is there anything written about this from a German point of view, of the realization that there was something unusual about this?
Nothing that I've seen, but I have to confess I haven't dug down too deeply into the German sources on this. The Germans were certainly surprised at dawn to find this Canadian battle group encamped in the middle of what they had expected to be one of their main lines of resistance. Essentially, Worthington Force had found a seam that they hadn't yet occupied. The German forces that were further north, that were probably evacuating south alongside of Worthington Force, were supposed to dig in along that line where the BCR and Algonquins ended up. And for them to find the Canadians there at dawn was a real scary moment for them. But I mean, the Germans are good soldiers, and they do what good soldiers do, and they adapted to the situation and began probing the battle group slowly at first. I think as the day went on and they realized there was no artillery, it must have come as something of a shock, but a pleasant surprise for them. And probably they adapted their tactics to deal with that, knowing that they could form up on the backside of a hill and prepare to come on without having to worry about getting stomped by Allied artillery.
Yeah. Couple more comments. Peter made this one ages ago, but it kind of ironically sums up this story. Irony is that with the exception of the Poles, the RAF, and the Germans, neither Worthington nor headquarters realized he was on a hill 4 miles from the one he was on. I mean, that kind of sums up the curiousness about this is that, you know, lots of people realize there's an error of navigation, but vitally not the right people at the right time. It's the perfect storm again, isn't it?
Yeah, and like I said, I can't know when Worthington finally figured it out, but I'm sure he did by like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. But even then, it's not sure, because he didn't seem to make any kind of concerted effort to get that message through. Booth, the commander of 4th Canadian Armored Brigade, must have been panicking, trying to figure out where his battle group had gone. Kitching as well, but I think they were so far out of the expected area that nobody really questioned that whatever was going on over there was the missing battle group. They still thought they were in the shadow of Hill 195, or there was some supposition that maybe they'd extended too far forward, that they'd crossed over Hill 195 and kept going, and they were further south. They really had no idea for most of the day, and that's the tragic point of it.
And Sheldrake is reinforcing the idea we said earlier. Most of the armchair quarterbacks who criticize the Canadians and Brits don't understand the density of German forces that were in their sector, and you know that can never be stated too many times. You know, when you look at the it's some of it's been wiped out by August, but there's still a shitloads of German armor in this sector. You know, very few German tanks per se in the West in June and July. But yeah, the predominance of armor in this area is, and artillery and experienced German units. Really good point, which is a potential rabbit hole. Enjoy your drinks, folks, from Brad. If it had worked, probably no tractable, and the push to Falaise happens faster. Would you concur with that, Mike?
Yeah, I get a little bit worried about making grand suppositions like that. Yeah. But yeah, that makes sense. I mean, what do the Germans do if all of a sudden they've lost that line? All of a sudden their new defensive line goes where? It can't really go just further south, because that's really in line. I think at that point you probably have to retire further south of Falaise. And is there a good line back there that makes sense to stand on? Maybe not, and that means maybe they pull back to the Seine River finally, like they should have done weeks earlier. So yeah, I think that's a fair comment, but again, there's way too many imponderables for me to say yes, that's what should have happened. So,
and Norma is reinforcing the idea about communications, you know, and although, as you said, they were working, and the, you know, 15 messages or types of communication, but somehow just not the right message being understood from this contact. But that, you know, that is, you know, how many times is it due to miscommunications? How many battles work well because the communications are working well, and how many fall apart because they're not working apart? And the other thing I wanted to say, kind of thing, is we've all read those accounts by the, you know, the REME drivers or the Royal Army Service Corps guys who are saying we went down a road to find a unit and they turned up to be down a different road. Again, as we said earlier, I think we shouldn't come away from this thinking that every other single day in Normandy, every element of the British and Canadian advance is working properly, because I just don't think it was. I think there's always trucks going off down the road. There's always artillery units that have been given the wrong information, etc., etc. It's just in this case, everything was amplified, and you keep reinforcing by the fact it is, you know, 6.5 kilometers away, and the difference of being that much lost made so much difference. But you know, the other occasions of a unit going down the wrong road with ammo, and then, you know, they having a laugh about it when they get there 2 hours late, it never affected the outcome of the battle. So we've kind of forgotten that an army is inherently not making mistakes, but it's a war. The situation is constantly in flux, and things do go wrong. But the outcome of this was so much more dramatic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think we're spoiled today with communications. I mean, here's you and I speaking. I'm in Waterloo. You're in and it's just normal. This is the way people talk today. And this would have been inconceivable 80 years ago. And when we're driving today, we have GPS and we know where we are every second. And I'm sure you remember this, Woody, but when you used to drive by maps, you're driving along in an unfamiliar area and you're getting close to your turn, but you're never quite sure where that turn is. It's like, I think it's coming up soon, but not quite sure. And you've got kind of that the hairs raising in the back of your neck.
Yeah.
Have I passed it? Have I not passed it? And that's just like driving out to see friends or something like that. Could you imagine on the battlefield where you really never exactly know where you are, and you're hoping you don't make a wrong turn, because you make a wrong turn and the next thing you know, you're in a minefield, or you're into a German position, or something like that. And
when
that,
I'm out for the day with Colin and Mag, the amount of times we do a U-turn on a general recce day is, it'd be into double figures. Oh, it must be that. Oh, it was that turning. It was that there. It was the one we just went past. Find a place, turn around, go back and find it, and you lose 10 minutes, but you lose 10 minutes. And the name of the force. A couple of people are asking about the fact it was called Worthington Force. Just want to clarify: was it called that before it went out, or have we come to call it that after the event? Because Rob is saying it's a bit arrogant in some ways to have a leader's name attached to it. So was it informal at first?
No, that was what it was called. It was named after I don't know if they'd consider the armored regiment the senior regiment, but it was named after the commander of the armored regiment. So Worthington Force, the other battle group was based on the Grenadier Guards, and that was the Halfpenny Force, named after the commander of the armored unit for that one.
We would say halfpenny in British, but British English. But yeah, great question from Phil Blood. Who was held responsible after the battle? What, if anyone? I mean, given that the key figures die, I guess there wasn't too much raking over the coals.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot that could be done after the battle, because the senior guys were either dead or seriously wounded. I think if anybody could have been held accountable, it was Booth. And Booth is an interesting figure. Arthur was talking about his experience in Totalize, and I'm not sure where he gets the drunk story. I know I've heard that one, but I don't know if we've got good evidence of that or not. Maybe Arthur does. I'm not sure. But the one criticism of Booth in Totalize is that he's too far back, that he doesn't have a good grip on the battle, that he didn't go forward when he needed to, and maybe that's part of the reason why Worthington Force gets lost. Of course, in the follow-up battle, Tractable, again, it's 4th Armored Division, and Booth finds himself well forward this time. And I have to wonder if it's the criticism from Totalize that makes him go forward, trying to have a better grip on the battle, but his command tank ends up taking a round, and Booth is killed, and doesn't survive Tractable. So I have to wonder if Booth maybe would have been held accountable in some way, but again, he ended up not surviving either.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm going to end with the words from a comment from Scott Driscoll. He shared with Mike that I took 2 70-year-old men to Normandy along with their sons. Their father was a Normandy veteran, and they visited their father's best friend's grave, killed as part of Worthington Force. And I think as interesting as it is to have these discussions about, errors and faults and sometimes, bad luck, we're talking about an event in which people lost their lives, as is always the case on World War II TV. And given that it is the 80th anniversary, I think that's the way we should end this, with a kind of bowed respect to this unit that absolutely went down fighting. And that's the interesting thing. And I think the thing we're worth ending on is that, sure, they're in the wrong place, but my God, did they give a good account of themselves? And they went down, taking out as many of the enemy as they could with them, and doing what they should. And their actual control of that battle zone was pretty damn good, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's in their memory that we do what we do. These were all volunteers. These were guys that left their homes, they left their families and their kids to go do what they thought was right. And many of them, like Donald Worthington, didn't come home again. So it's in their memory.
And as Sheldrake says, the units were back in the fight about 2 weeks later. That's that ability the Allies have to kind of repair themselves in terms of personnel and equipment pretty damn quickly, although leaving, of course, the temporary cemeteries behind them. But that recovery ability of Allies by 44 is pretty amazing. And these units carry on fighting to the end of the war. So there we are. Brad is reminding us that to walk the battlefield is always a benefit. But those who can't walk the battlefield, we've got the staff ride that I put the link into the chat earlier on. And we've got Mike's article, and we've got this show to watch. So we'll end things there. So this is Paul Dodge and Mike saying, Thanks very much for your fantastic commentary and questions, everybody. Thank you very much, Mike, for the fantastic explanation and the amazing visuals today. And folks, I'm having a bit of a break from World War II TV, so I'll see you in a few days' time. And in the meantime, thanks for your support. Brad has got a video coming on this on his channel as well. Consider becoming a patron of all these channels that are giving you great history. And otherwise, check out their books, check out their websites. Mike's website is in the description below. And I will see you in a few days' time. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.